That's okay. I don't have that configured yet. You can hear me now though. Nice to see everyone. Welcome to COMP6080 for 21T3. It's really good to have, I think we have a record number of students in the course this term. I think how many we have? 350, I think. So I think that's the biggest. I can't remember how many we had when we started the course. It was something in the 200 range and it's been progressively going up. So welcome to the biggest cohort in COMP6080's very short history. Today is pretty much just a chance for us to really go through the basics of the course. We won't really be covering any theory in any reasonable detail today. That's kind of what the pre-recorded lectures are for, though we'll kind of step through all of that. If you haven't figured out by now, given I'm the one who's been emailing you, my name is Hayden, and you'll be putting up with me a lot this term. We also have a bunch of teaching staff, but we'll go through those. But in the meantime, let's start chatting about COMP6080 and what it's about. So I guess the big question that kind of starts everything in a course like this is, why? Like, why would you pay $1,000 or $4,000 or spend however many hours of your time doing this course? And we kind of have to start with that question of what is a front-end developer? I mean, what is the name of the course? It is COMP6080, what's it called? Front-end, I forget. Front-end web something. Web front-end programming. I always get the words mixed up. So it's web front-end programming. Now, programming, we don't need to talk about, but web and front-end are really important. So the first question is, what is a front-end developer? Typically, it's someone who writes code that is executed client-side. So all the time in your life these days, you're interacting with devices that have a client-side and a server-side, right? When you pick up your phone and you log into your banking app, there's a bunch of code that runs on that phone, and then that phone's talking to something somewhere else, and there's some other code running on that something somewhere else. And a front-end developer is typically focused on the code that runs on the devices you have inside of people's hands, and typically end user facing products. Sometimes this could be an actual user, someone who's using a game app or a banking app, or sometimes it could be what you might call like a business user, like someone at UNSW who organizes the timetables, has software that they use internally that you can't. But all of these things are interfaces, and these interfaces that front-end developers work on, in most of the cases these days, the code they write for this front-end work is written for web browsers. So Google Chrome, Firefox, Safari, Microsoft Edge, and everything else. It's all kind of running there. So, 10 or 20 years ago, you might have done a lot of front-end programming with something like Java or some C++ libraries, whereas nowadays you have a substantial amount of stuff being written for and inside of web browsers. So in a lot of ways, this is a course about helping you make web browsers do things for people, right? Build interfaces for people through web browsers. Now, web browsers themselves, Google Chrome, Firefox, and whatnot, they're very complex things. There's a lot of depth we can go into, but to give you a sense of, what is in the course, it's like these browsers typically use HTML, which is a markup language, to structure things. They use CSS to style the pages, and then they use JavaScript to make them dynamic and bring them to life. And we're going to use all of those technologies to build things for people to use. And by the end of this course, you will have built things that you can share with people and show people, and they'll be excited that you've done. So that's kind of why we're all excited here. Now, why COMP6080? What is the why? That's what this is. And then it's like, why? Why would you do this course? Okay, so you get everything else is important. But even further, some things to keep in mind. On GitHub, when you look at some of the stats, about a quarter of all code pushes on GitHub are now JavaScript code. So and you can look at these stats a whole bunch of different ways. Different kinds of repos have different frequencies and different kinds of projects. But in general, you could easily say that 1/4 of code being pushed is JavaScript, right? The language of the web, the language that powers a lot of modern front ends. And in 2018 alone, I was digging through some articles trying to find something interesting. There was 1 in 4 job postings put on the internet were for a JavaScript-based framework, and just only one framework, which is the one we're covering in the course. It's probably a little less now because popularity changes and stuff, but we're talking about an absolute massive influx of demand for these skills. Now, I think what's really important to get your head around too is that you don't come out of a course like this or a few courses like this being like an expert on this material. You are still operating in an extremely competitive space, because if you're dealing, like, what do you think people in the developing world who are learning to program are doing right now, right? They're doing this stuff because of the job market that exists. It's easy to find work. There's a lot of work for it. So it's not like you kind of come out of this being like, I'm an expert on all of these things, but the hope is that you already have this deep foundational knowledge so far through your degree in computer science that you can apply to this and become a better engineer amidst the skills that we can hopefully spend some time on. But these stats are crazy, absolutely crazy. How did we get to this point? Because this was not the case decades ago, right? Like, a lot of the stuff that we build with today is fairly recent. It was created in probably everyone here's, well, many people here's lifetime, and a lot of the modern tech or framework we use are all from just the last years. So I want to take you through a little bit of a brief history of kind of what led us to all of these points. So firstly, when web browsers first became a bit more popular, particularly in the advent of the web. So if you think about the history of computers, right? They built computers, 70s, 80s, and then once they built computers, they figured out how to make them talk to each other, and that's where you had networks, right? You had computers that were networked together. They built lots of protocols for computers to talk to each other, and then from that, someone said, what if we make a global network and let's connect all the computers together on a network called the internet. And then as part of that, we started to see our first web browsers. Now, the first web browsers, think of this like the early day version of Google Chrome. What these tools were essentially programs that could get a file off the internet, and that file just happened to be of a certain protocol and standard. And the early, that's where you get your HTTP standard for, which was like the standard to transfer web page information across the internet. And around that time in the early 90s, you had your first standardization of HTML. HTML is the building blocks of the web pages, and you'll see more about these in the pre-recorded lectures. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's what gives web pages their structure. If you've ever written a markdown file, I know there's a lot of students here, well, all undergrads who've done like COMP6080 and some other courses. If you've ever done a markdown file, like a .md file in a Git repo, that's what HTML is. It's like that, but more, far more. It's a markdown. It's like you just specify, dot points, text, titles, links, images, like all these really basic things. And so HTML kind of came around in the early 90s, and it let you build pages like this back when the internet was very informational at its core. What started to happen after that was, as this became more popular and as people started doing this stuff more, there was the introduction of CSS and JavaScript, which are the other 2 out of 3 languages that I'd referred to before. Now, the point of CSS and JavaScript, which came out in the mid-90s, were really about trying to make the internet not look ugly, right? Because before these languages kind of existed, that was what every web page looked like, and then we wanted to start making things look prettier. Now, this web page is not from 1996, it's just a random web page with some colors on it. But what CSS did was it allowed you to make pages pretty, to give them a little bit more detail in the structure, to give it colors, sizes, buttons, fonts. Like it was really a great opportunity to turn ugly pages into pretty pages, and it was layered on top of HTML. And then similarly, JavaScript, which is a language that makes your web pages dynamic, came about at the same time. And every time you interact with a website, you're probably using some form of JavaScript technology, right? So if you're on YouTube right now watching this and you see the like button and the dislike button and the comments, every time you click that and something changes, this is all JavaScript tech that's making something dynamic happen. So it's kind of like, if you want to understand HTML and CSS, it's like, it's what the page looks like. Whenever you want to do something with it, that's when you start getting into JavaScript stuff. So throughout the late 90s was where websites started to become kind of interactive and fun now. And you know, I was born in 93, so I don't have a very deep memory of this period very much. But for anyone who kind of remembers, you know, the internet from your childhood, it was a very simple place, right? You used to have to refresh for things to happen. Nothing was like crazy dynamic, but that's kind of what happened after that. Something crazy started to happen though around the like early 2000s, like the late 2000s, like 2008 and that kind of period. In around 2000, there was a technology developed. I don't know if it's technology. There was a certain method or technology, I'm not too sure, developed called Ajax, which stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And Ajax was a way of taking JavaScript and essentially, for lack of a better phrase, quietly talking to servers in the background without having to reload the page. So you know that if you go to old school websites, I mean, even some new websites, like let's just go to UNSW's website, right? UNSW, what do you notice about, they might have changed it. But you notice like when I click on a link, I get taken to a new page. And when I click on another link, I get taken to a new page. And what's happening here is that the page loads, there's all the stuff. You click on a link and it says, oh, we're going to go get a new web page, and it pulls it forward. So it's very kind of like chunk, chunk, chunk like that. With the introduction of Ajax, websites started to develop this ability to essentially do things that require talking to a server, but do so quietly in the background without creating this whole like page goes white, new page is loaded that you're kind of used to with crappy internet. And this kind of fundamentally began the transition away from web apps just being websites, because up until this point, you kind of had local applications for everything you did, right? If you wanted to use Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, or a video game, Microsoft Paint. Sorry, I grew up on Windows. I don't know what the hell Apple users do for fun when you're 8 years old. That was what you used that for, and web browsers were just the internet. But with the introduction of this ability to kind of talk to servers and give this real app-like feel, what web browsers started to do was feel like apps. And that's where you got your first live chats from, where you could actually message someone and get reactions, where you got Facebook timelines, feeds, and all of these things that were just fully integrated and immersive. And the story of the web in the last 20 years is essentially a story of a system that was designed to present information on documents over here. And on the other side of the world, you had native applications built in, again, languages like C++ or Java. And then as the web slowly gets more advanced, it just converges over in this area. So the deeper we go, the more years we go on, the more that websites start to feel like native applications that you use. You know, maybe you have a text editor online. Okay, you have a text editor on your computer. Well, Google Docs is pretty good now, and it's in a web browser, right? So that's the story we're telling. After these background requests started to exist, one thing you then started to see kind of around 2010 period, give or take, was a massive investment in actual heavy infrastructure built in JavaScript. Because to understand, again, the history of JavaScript, it was always like you built servers in Java, PHP, some other kind of language, not C, because you're not a monster. And then you would build a front end in JavaScript. So you'd have a JavaScript front end talking to like some other language on the back end, and they would just communicate. Whereas with some advancements in JavaScript like TypeScript, Node.js, which was JavaScript on the server, think of it like writing a Python server, like a Flask server in Python, but you're using JavaScript instead. This suddenly meant that you could build really cool applications, and then big applications started to be built out of this stuff. And we know what happens when big tech companies start to like a language, is they invest a lot of time and money into it. Like, who do you think makes these languages? You know, who do you think improves them and stuff? It's not just like the Java Incorporated, you know, it's a whole bunch of tech companies who are invested in the language and want to devote their time either for selfish reasons or philanthropic reasons to advance it. So that's a big thing you saw. And then the next few things, this is we're at the end of this kind of story now, is like we started to see another big push in what we call, I don't even know what you call them, embedded apps. We saw things what you call hybrid apps, or the use of Electron containers. And what this was once people started to notice that, hey, we've got these web pages that are so dynamic, they're so interactive, they're so powerful, they're so beautiful, that these feel like actual applications, like actual programs that I would use on the computer. Why don't we just ship or like release a piece of software, and all that software is literally a web browser in disguise that's actually just loading the website, whether literally or some static kind of compilation of it. And that's where we started getting apps like Discord, Slack, VS Code, I believe, Microsoft Teams. They're four just common ones you might have used. So if you've used Slack, Microsoft Teams, VS Code, or Discord, as far as I know, and I might be wrong on one of them, is like, they're all web apps. They're actually just websites. And when you download the app, like you download Slack or you download Microsoft Teams, you're actually just running, when you open it up, you're actually just running like another version of Google Chrome without all the crap around the outside that's acting like a website as well. And this became super popular because suddenly people realized, hey, instead of building a website and then a native application and then a phone app, I can just start building everything as in a web browser and then shipping it out to various people, you know? And like, they're topical in the course, but if you take Canva, for instance, if you go to canva.com if you download the Canva app, it's actually just a wrapper for a web browser. So it's an absolute saturation of just solving problems by building web pages, because the power of what you can do with web pages and the scope at which you can deploy them is just quite immense. And this has kind of led us to our last point, which is a little bit relevant to this course, which is declarative frameworks. And again, essentially, as the popularity of JavaScript picked up, we started to see that people said, you know what, like kind of classic JavaScript sucks. Let's build some good frameworks for it. And if you've coded in other languages, again, like Python, you'd be familiar with things like, I don't want to call Flask a framework because it's a very tiny framework, but you know, you got Django when it comes to Python. I don't really have any other good CSE-like examples, I think. But you had these frameworks which made it actually easier to program, because JavaScript historically had a pretty bad rap as being a very ugly language, and it's not a very pretty language. But people said, hey, let's actually build something that makes it super easy to code this in. So they built it, and we saw Angular, which came from Google. It was a JavaScript framework. React.js from Facebook came after, and then Vue.js, who I always forget where Vue.js came from. That's not Google, is it? Was it just a random person? A lot of these things are often, someone will know in the chat. Someone will just tell me, no doubt. No, it's just Evan Yu. Okay, I didn't think it was any more than that. Sorry, I didn't think it was just like a couple of people. Cool. So, what this means is that now there's even easier ways to build sites, right? You could never build websites anywhere near as quickly as you can today. So it's a super exciting time to be getting into web development. I've been involved, I don't know how long now. I've been involved in commercial web development, I think, for probably like 14 years now. And I can tell you that this is a super exciting time to be involved in web anything. Everything is easy, everything is fast, everything is powerful, everything is extremely versatile. It's super duper duper exciting. So this is not all theory that you have to absorb and regurgitate. This is just background to give you a sense that we've gone from a place where web browsers were this simple informational resource and have now become an absolute powerhouse of pretty much all client-side applications, all client-side developments. Great. Now, just before we get into the course overview and get into the boring admin stuff, I'm just going to I saw some chat messages coming through and I ignored some of them. People have answered a lot of the questions here. People are asking about, I noticed there's a Node.js installation guide on WebCMS. Does that mean we implement a backend or create a server? This will become a lot clearer to you in week 2. I think next week I talk a lot more about that. In the meantime, you don't really need to worry about that at all. Anything to do with Node.js. We're not writing backends in this course. We're all writing front ends. You do have to interact with some backends, but we'll get to that when we get to it as well. Again, I don't want to give you a short answer on, like, okay, I'll give you the short answer on Node.js. Node.js is a command line interpreter for JavaScript. So Python, if we take that as an example, is a language. But when you type into a terminal Python space and then your program, you're using an interpreter that takes your source code, understands the language rules, and does stuff based on what you've written. Node.js is a command line tool that does that for JavaScript. That is somewhat relevant in this course, though a lot of what we're doing in this course is going to be done in the web browser, which is not a command line. So again, it'll make more sense next week as we talk through the details, but it's kind of relevant, but you don't need to worry about it at all. We actually have a very soft intro into this course. We spend the first week or so just HTML, CSS, just to keep things pretty light. That was by design. All right. Course overview. Let's do the boring stuff. Assume knowledge. So we assume that you know a few things in this course. We assume that you have a basic understanding of Git, which is a version control tool. For those of you who are undergrads, you should be competent in this because you've done courses relating to it. For those of you who are postgrads, I know that some of you will not have done this because of the funny way that UNSW does programs. Thankfully, this term, we've taken the material from an undergrad course where we teach Git, and we've created a... Does this link? Yeah, I can't take you to this right now, but we've created a little activity where you can actually go and get set up ready for the course. So if you aren't familiar with Git, the version control tool, you can follow the link in the slides. There's also a link on Web CMS3. You can find if you go to tutorials and exercises, you see it up here. It's Git intro right there. That's super helpful if you're not too familiar with Git. We do make an assumption that you understand HTTP and web browsers at a really basic level. Do you know what get, push, post, and deleters? Do you... that's kind of most of it, actually, to be honest. And we also assume that you have a fairly high-level understanding of scripting languages. So if you've done anything Perl, Python, PHP, I'm sure some others, then you'll pick up JavaScript relatively quickly. Most of you have done Python, which will be enough to get over the line. And I think a lot of the lecture about JavaScript syntax is based on the assumption that you've done Python, and that should be pretty easy. If you are very experienced in web development, you'll find this course a little bit slow sometimes. If that's what you're here for, then that's fine. So what are we trying to achieve in this course? We are trying to achieve a small series of things. We want you to get really good at JavaScript and understand the language and how to make things dynamic. We want you to know how to build web pages, how to make them look a certain way. We want you to use modern tools that are frameworks built on top of JavaScript. We're interested in you getting familiar with asynchronous programming. This is something that's slightly different in JavaScript compared to other languages like Python. Like when you write programs in things like C or Python or even Java, you're probably very used to this idea that it basically just all executes in a very linear fashion, like imperative programming languages. But in this course, JavaScript's an event-driven language, which means it's asynchronous and by default and some funky things. It's a quarter of it's kind of like, whoa, that's different. And that's kind of what that fourth dot point's about. We want to teach you a basic knowledge of front-end security. I won't lie, that's actually not covered in very much depth at all. There's lots of things we do in this course that you can learn more about in other courses. So we didn't want to go into much depth with that and cannibalize other courses. And we want you to have an awareness of UI, UX design, as well as including accessibility. We want you to think more. We want you to not just be a nerd when you're building web pages. We want you to think about them a little bit more. In terms of teaching on the course, you can go read the course outline at FAQs. Go read the course outline if you haven't read it, because it covers a lot of things. But the main thing I want to kind of emphasize to people is that there are kind of three big things that we learn in the course, which is HTML, CSS, structure pages, JavaScript, which we sometimes call vanilla JavaScript, JavaScript classic, whatever you want to call it, and then frameworks, which are like modern ways to use JavaScript. Now, there was a decision made in the creation of this course which said, we don't just want to teach you vanilla JavaScript, classic JavaScript, because you won't take away any skills that you'd actually use in the real world, right? We don't just want to teach you the modern stuff because we feel like you need more background in terms of the science, the fundamentals of how that all works. I'll fix up any broken links. So we said we want to teach both, but then we said, okay, we only have 10 weeks. All right, well, that's a problem. How about we teach one then the other? Let's do 5 weeks on one, 5 weeks on the other. The problem with that is that it's kind of like that classic trimester problem where it's like you can't what's that trimester joke? It's like you can't cook you can't cook cookies twice as fast by cooking them at twice the temperature. They just burn. So it's the same thing where it's like, just if you take 10 weeks of content and you compress it together and you give students more time, it's not the same. So what we opted to do instead was that at the start of the course, we teach you a lot of vanilla JavaScript and just a little bit of modern JavaScript. And then as the course goes on, towards the end, we teach you less and less and less and less of the classic stuff and more and more and more of the new stuff. And we do teach those things a little bit in parallel, just so that you're exposed to it for a longer amount of time, because some of you will think, oh, there's a lot of, context switching going on. There's not that much, to be honest, but it's like there is some, more than some other courses. And you might think, oh, that's so painful, but we would rather talk about two things throughout the course than break it in half like that, because in my educational experience, some stuff you're just not going to learn in 5 weeks with brute force. That's what that diagram is talking about. Okay, who's teaching you this term? I am. We have a bunch of UNSW tutors listed there. We have Zane, who helps out in the course. He's a CSE alum from Google. I don't remember exactly when he graduated, but it was in the last couple of years. He's like 26 or something. Very young, extremely smart. And then from Canva, we have these people that have been involved with producing lecture content. So some of them you might not see because we've changed some designs around, some lectures around, but these are all the people who've helped make some of the pre-recorded lectures. Basically, the pre-recorded lectures are probably, 40%, 50% Canva, 35% me, and 15% Zane or something like that. Though we are re-recording some other stuff this term as well. We record stuff every time, and then there's some more Canva people here that help out a lot. Peter Camilleri is a massive help. He's probably spent the most amount of time from Canva making some of the content come together. He's helped coordinate Canva so that I don't have to harass their staff, which is good. Okay, in terms of assessments in the course, very simple course. 3 assignments, 1 exam. That's it. The assignments are due at the start of week 4, the start of week 7, the end of week 10 probably. I think I still have to figure that out, but it's due in week 10. I'll probably make it the end of week 10. There's a common trade-off, which is that if we make assignment 3 due at I might do a poll. I'm going to do a poll about this. If you make it assignment 3 due at the start of week 10, you have less time to do it, but you'll probably get your mark back before the exam. If you make it due at the end of week 10, you probably won't get your mark back before the end of the exam because you can't start marking that weekend. You get the point. I'm going to make a poll about this. I want to make a note about it. Make a poll about assignment 3 due date. We'll vote on it. Democracy. Don't know. Maybe I'll regret that, but we'll see how it goes. In terms of the assignments, all 3 assignments are writing code or markup to make pages look like stuff and do stuff. Assignment 1's all HTML, CSS. Assignment 2's all, I think, did I write this down somewhere? It's all written in the course outline, I think, or not here. These are all summaries. They're all, JavaScript or CSS or something like that. Assignment 1's 15%, the other 2 are 30%, and the exam's 25%. So standard questions from people: is the exam a double pass? Is there any hurdle in the exam? There's no hurdle for the exam. There's no double pass. It's 25%. More than half of you are going to pass the course before the exam. Open book exams don't make any sense as hurdles, because the whole point of hurdles is that if you're in a locked room, we know it's you, and if you cheated for the rest of the course and you fail the exam, we know it's because you cheated. Sadly, open book exams mean you can cheat the whole course. We'll try and find you. We don't always. That's a bit of a shame, but we will try and find you. But no, the exam's 25%. It's small. We don't want you to be stressed. Many of you will pass the course before the exam. The exam will just determine what grade you get after you pass. The exam is like the assignments. We will ask you to build things. We'll ask you to write code to make web pages do a certain thing and look like a certain thing. The way I think about the exam, this is my philosophy, is that I used to hate exams because I thought it was like really unindicative of the real world. Like, oh, lock you in a room without the internet. But so when we get out of exams, when we get out of the closed book exams and we get open book exams, I think, oh, well, that's nice. It feels a little bit more real worldy. And the thing I've noticed in my own experience working, doing enough things in my life is that about a quarter of the time, this is my general thing, a quarter of the time you're working to some kind of time pressure, right? In my rough judgment. 3/4 of the work you do in life is kind of like, yeah, just get it done. A quarter of it's kind of like, get it done soon. So I actually think it's really valuable to test what people know under pressure, assuming they have access to the internet. You know, so you should have access to the internet, which is, it's an open book exam, and that's the kind of plan, is that the final exam will feel like a small assignment that you're under time pressure to complete, because that is a good skill to test, in my opinion. We could make it go to 0, but the problem is then we'd have to make the assignments harder, and then you're basically doing more work I've thought about this, right? One thing I'll say up from the start is that assignment 2 is typically the assignment, the bump in the course. It's where people go, it's where you really feel the weight of learning hit you. Assignment 1's like hard-ish, like, you know, it's like new. It's not that hard, but it's hard because it's new. Assignment 2 will challenge you. Assignment 3 will also challenge you, but you'll get there. If anyone's gone to high school in New South Wales, think of it like assignment 2 is like going from year 10 to year 11. It's not the hardest thing you do in high school, but it's certainly the biggest step up. So we're going to release assignment 2 early in this course, and my advice to you is to start it probably in week 3 or something like that. The reason I mention that is because we used to make assignment 1 due earlier, like start of week 3, end of week 3, so that people would get it done and start focusing on assignment 2. We have extended when assignment 1 is due into the start of week 4 to give you all more flexibility with your study, though just be careful again. You know, I'm not saying you have to. It's just like, you know, half the students will feel like you don't have enough time for assignment 2. So I'm just saying, you know, don't just be like, I'll totally finish assignment 1 right at the deadline, and then I'll take a week off, and then I'll worry about the second assignment. You will have a bad flex week. So that's just a friendly tip from me. Chen says, is it an individual or group assignment? Assignment 3 is optionally a group assignment. We'll talk about that later in the course. Augustine says, where can we vote for the assignment 3 deadline? I'll put up a web CMS3 poll and I'll share it in the Friday notice. It's not urgent. It's not coming out for weeks, so I'll send it on Friday. And the other question was, Raymond says, will the assignments be auto-marked? No. Auto-marking front-end is an extremely grueling activity, and I haven't done any numbers on it, but my back of the envelope would say that it would probably cost, like, the cost of manually marking, to write auto-marking for these assignments would take terms to pay off, and you're going to change the assignment in which you have to change the auto-marking, so it's just not worth it, so we just get tutors to do it. So here says, can we send a draft earlier to be checked? We don't check drafts for assignments because it is unfair to other students to kind of give some guidance like that. But you can, of course, submit it early, and of course you can ask questions about it on the forum about your interpretation of what you need to do. I don't need to talk about this. We have lectures, we have tutes. The one thing I'd say about lectures is that what you'll find on WebCMS3 is that this is our lectures page with all the lectures, as you can see here. Lots of lectures, lots of pre-recordings. Some of them we're redoing. We've done them before, but we want to change them up. That's what the coming soon ones are. And there's a bunch of live lectures that aren't there yet because we haven't done them. Like this one today. This one will come up here, the video when it's done. For the live lectures, we will typically do the lectures on a Wednesday evening. We won't do it on a Monday. I like Wednesday lectures. It gives us a chance to, I don't know, maybe we'll do it on a Monday sometime, but generally we do it on a Wednesday. I think it's good because in the later weeks, a lot of the lectures kind of assume that you've watched the other lectures. So like in week 2, the lecture here kind of assumes that you've watched these ones. So like a general approach would be watch the pre-recordings, then we'll do the live lecture on Wednesday. That's fun. So a Wednesday, we won't normally use the Monday 6 to 8 lectures at all. We might use it in the last week with the guest lectures and stuff, but you can pretty much just like most likely leave this chunk on a Monday, like cross it out. It's fine. Take a break. In terms of lecture time, the pre-recorded lectures do add up to a little more than 2 hours a week, I believe. I can't remember the number. It's like 2.5 or something. So I'm not going to be worried if we finish early some weeks for lectures because I don't want to drown you. We always have an aim to do about 36 hours of lectures a week. A term. So that's just fine. If we finish early, don't freak out like we're not learning stuff. It's more like there's actually a lot of content out there, and I don't need to drown you in it anymore. Okay. We have tutorials as normal. The timetable's up here. It's all done on Zoom. Zoom links to the tutorials. A quick note to people. People enrolled Tuesday 11 to 12. There is no tute at your time. I'm sorry, that's never happened before. None of the tutors were free at that time. So we just kind of merged you in here, but this notion of merging is kind of meaningless because you can attend any tute you like. Like if you're free at any of these times, you can go to any of these tutes, and I record mine anyway and share it with you. So you don't even need to go to these tutes. You can just watch the recording, and you don't even need to watch the recording. You can just not attend. You're all adults. I'll leave it up to you to figure out what you want to do, but that's tutorials. Attend any one you want. That's it. We got different tutors. On that topic as well, we have exercises and help sessions. So in this course, we don't have labs. We have exercises, which are basically labs. It's just, I didn't want to call them labs because it gets confused with people thinking you have to you have a time for it. It's basically take-home exercises that are like labs that aren't marked. They're all listed on this page as well. In terms of further support though, one thing we do a lot of, and we do a lot of this for a level 6 course, is we do run help sessions in the course. We run them via Zoom. And the way these work are that you rock up to a Zoom call and you join a queue. You pretty much join this queue at this link here. I think you just log in. No, you don't. You just sign in with your Z number and Z pass. It's all very intuitive, and you can post on the forum if you need help. And you join a queue, and you join the Zoom call, and when a tutor's free to help you, they drag you into a breakout room, and they help you out. And they give you help. And then you get some help and you go away. These help sessions run at all different times throughout the term. Look how many we have. We have so many. There's more people on sessions towards the peak of an assignment. So you can actually see here, this is assignment 1, approaching, and finished. And then assignment 2 approaching and finished. You get the point. So we've scheduled them quite intentionally. Please be aware that the university, tragically, is not resourced to handle everyone wanting help at the same time in detail. So sometimes you will have to wait for a bit to get help. Just go to help sessions. Go to help sessions with the 2 hours blocked off with something else to do. Yeah, that's my advice to you, because you might sit around waiting sometimes, and it's just have something else to do. That's just my tip again. Can I introduce the exam? I don't know what that means. I'm sorry, Jin. You'll have to elaborate. Okay, so that's kind of it. We will talk about the exam in week 8 or something like that. I'll release info about it in week 8 and we'll talk about it in week 10. This is all listed again on WebCMS 3. You can see it right here, exam. It says, oh, that's the old one. I'm going to get rid of this because we make changes to it every term, but basically it always says roughly the same thing. So nothing particularly exciting. I just don't want to add any confusion or set any expectations because things do change every single term. Coming Monday of week 8. Great. Done. Okay, in terms of getting help. If you want help throughout the course, the first place to go, and pretty much always the place to go, is the Ed forum on the side here. You go here, it takes you to Ed. You simply, if you've already made an account, you just log in, and many of you have already been there before, and I don't want to pull it up because there's some private forum posts, but you can go check out that and post if you have questions. We're always here to help. If there's something you feel can't be resolved on the forum, or you've tried to resolve it on the forum and we haven't been able to help you, you can go to a help session like we've mentioned. And if you can't get help with that, please email cs6080 at cse.unsw.edu.au. Do not email me. Your email will get answered slower. In fact, you can email me. Go ahead, but only if you don't want only if you want a slow reply. That's what I'll tell you. So please email cs6080 and I will help you out. That goes to me. No one else, sadly, just me. But I will be helpful for that. Okay. I moved house and it's very strange because my my desk is on a window to the street and there's people, the window's still open and people just kind of look in awkwardly. Okay, so to get set up for this course, one of the good things about 6080 is that the setup is quite trivial in the sense that pretty much all you really need in the course is like a web browser, a text editor, and depending on what you're doing, a Node.js interpreter, like installing JavaScript on the computer, basically, installing a JavaScript command line. And that's all. It's actually a really simple course to set up. It's one of the few courses that I think everyone here can do locally. I think a lot of courses, even courses just in simple languages, have a little bit of involvement to do locally, or it's just really chunky or clunky or anything like that. But this course is really simple to set up. And in fact, the only thing you do need to do to do this course is install Node.js, and we don't even need to do that yet. Like, we can do that next week or the week after. So you're good to go. You're good to write stuff. You have a web browser and a text editor? Great, done. All good. You don't need anything fancy. The only thing you probably need to familiarize yourself with, if you don't already know it, is Gitlab. And as we've said, if you're familiar with Gitlab, this will make sense. If you're not familiar with Gitlab, go to the Git intro lab that we've linked. But Gitlab is a Git repository hosted by CSE where we do everything from. It's mysteriously slow. Right. Yeah, so this is Gitlab. So, for instance, exercises 1 is here. You have your GitLab repo. Here's all the information on it. You can clone it to your computer. You can work on it locally and all of that. Again, I think what we'll do is so here's what happens. We've got 350 students. About 120 of you or 100 of you probably aren't going to be familiar with Git. 50, 60 of you will learn it and pick it up really quick. 20 or so will learn it and pick it up a little slower, but you'll still be okay. And then there'll be a handful of people who are just really confused by it. And for those people, just go along to a help session and get some help. Because for me to kind of step through things in a lecture time will be very repetitive for people who have done it before. We've already given a lot of instructions about it in the lab intro. It's a very detailed lab intro. It's really helpful. And you can also look up, we have a Git resources page here, which is, albeit quite light, just the 2 other helpful resources if you wanted. So we're 100% here to totally support people if they have any Git issues. Because we have made the course based on GitLab and Git, we're here to support you. Don't freak out, you have our support. Roger says, is GitLab the same as GitHub? No. I don't know. It's like, think of it like Google Chrome, Safari, Firefox. They're all just different implementations of a web browser. GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, they're all just different implementations of Git, which is a language and a capability. It's like an open source one though. So yeah. Okay, some other questions. Did I bring my old chair with you? Yeah, but I bought a new chair. So say hi to new chair. It's very nice. And Augustine, it's a bit early, but can I get some idea of how our final exam will be done? Will it be done after business hours? I don't think so. I don't have anything to do with your exam timetabling, like zero. No one consults me. Often it's going to be during the day though. So if you're working, you will have to take an afternoon off typically. Pretty much every level 6 course I've been involved with has an afternoon exam, but I don't know if that's just chance. Sunil says, is it necessary to know Git commands for the course, or is it okay to use a GUI-based tool for GitLab? That's a great question. So we don't, Git is not meant to get in the way in this course. In fact, a typical thing we see students do is take a Git repo, this one, and they go clone, and then they open a terminal on their computer or whatever program they're using, and then they follow the commands that we teach you, and you go git clone, and then you clone that, and then they clone it, as you'd expect. Also, this is the first lecture I've done on a hotspot. I hope it's okay. The internet where I am sucks. Oh, it just went to 0. That's quite funny. Jesus. Just going to pause the recording because the stream stopped. Thankfully, the recording paused most of that. So basically what I was saying is someone asked about how much do I need to know Git, and the point I was trying to make was that in this course, all you're really doing with Git is you're cloning a repository. You are going into the folder of that repository, and then you're just going to do your work as if it's just a folder. And then when you're done, you'll git commit and you'll git push. And you're done. And that's really it. So the point is, for those of you who don't know Git or do know Git, it's there just as it's not there as part of the accessible content. It's just there because students like it. It's a great way for us to track things. There's a lot of benefits for it for what is a very little mountain to overcome. So that's just some background on Git. But go check out that GitLab exercises activity. One difficult thing about teaching this course is that everything is so well resourced that a lot of the time when students are like, where do I find things? We're just go look on the internet because there's so much good stuff out there. In particular, we have a resources page. I hope I made this repo public. Someone said before they couldn't access it. Now it's public. That explains why people couldn't access it. So yeah, it's there's this resources thing here where just tutors, students, whoever, we just keep a list of random resources relating to Node.js, React.js, CSS. If you have things here you think are great, pass them along. Email me about it. I'd love to look at them and put them in if you think there's something. If you found something that was great to learn, we can share it with everyone and we can all get a little bit smarter together. That would be awesome. So that's what there is in terms of resources. And Common question is around style guides. Like, do you have a particular style guide? Is this like COMP1511 or another course where there's a style guide? So we do not have style guides per se in this course. There's a slightly more long-winded answer that we'll talk about later on. But basically, if you want a style guide, because I know some students just, they want a style guide not because they're like, I want to be miserable. They do it because they're like, I don't know if what I'm doing is good. Like, is this how other people do it? We have also got another file here, which essentially is like, here's some style guides for, here's just Google style guide for HTML, here's Google style guide for JavaScript, here's Facebook style guide, or sorry, Airbnb style guide for React. So if you're like, I just want some guidance, you can come here. None of this is accessible. You don't have to like worry about that at the moment. We do some linting later in the course, but that's hardly style guides because you just do what the linter says. So don't worry about style guides. If you have feedback throughout the course, you can always share it up in the top left. If you just click on this feedback link on WebCMS3, you get taken straight to this form and you can fill it out and share some stuff. Share anything you want, anytime you want. I look at it every week or two. The only thing I'd say is please leave your name. You don't have to. That's why it's optional. But I would encourage you to, because here's a really common thing someone does. They leave a comment like, assignment 1 is too hard, or assignment 1 is too boring, or the labs aren't very helpful. And what happens with that is that I can't follow you up. Because if I see a comment like, the labs are too hard, the exercises are too hard, my next question is going to be what and why, and I'd want to learn more. So if you don't leave your name, there's a reasonable chance I actually just have to like bin your feedback, right? Because there's things that I believe you on, but I don't know what to do with it. You know what I mean? So I would just encourage you, if you're not super shy to leave feedback, to put your name there, sorry. But you can email me, whatever. This is just easy. It's there on WebCMS3 if you're feeling in the mood to say hi and share some thoughts. Totally up to you. And then last thing, as always, I just want to make clear that we have expectations put on you around student conduct. We're here to create an inclusive learning environment, thankfully, because this course is quite mature and, it's quite simple in its structure. There's not a lot of rooms for people to mistreat each other, but please just don't show each other respect. And if at any point you feel like you're not being shown respect by a COMP6080 staff member or by another student, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or any kind of anyone at any university service that could be supportive there, because it's something we care about quite a lot. Okay, so the last two things we have today, I was going to do a little bit of, here's some really basic web stuff, just so you can get a sense of what the hell we're going to be talking about for a lot of weeks. And then we were going to do a little bit of an intro into assignment 1. So assignment 1, I'm basically going to be releasing after this lecture. It'll be deployed to your GitLab repo. So essentially maybe 9 p.m. or something. You can go to WebCMS3, you can go to assignments, you can click on assignment 1. This link will take you to a login, which will take you to the right spot on GitHub, and you can check out the assignment for yourself. Everything we do in GitLab in this course for assignments, we have one master assignment, which is like a template, and that's automatically deployed out to all of you. So like there's 350 of you, so we create 350 copies of this assignment, and you have your own personal GitLab repository where you can work on it. Very neat stuff. So we want to talk a little bit about assignment 1. Now, I'm going to talk about that first, because it's very relevant and it's not quite finished yet. There's a couple of tweaks still to make, so it's still in draft stage, as you can see 8 minutes ago. But basically what assignment 1 is it's 4 questions. The first 3 questions give you an image of a web page, or a snippet, an image of a snippet of a web page. And we say, write some HTML and CSS to make a page look like that. So we give you basically a JPEG, and we say write some code that when you load it in a web browser will look like that JPEG. That's 3/4 of the assignment, really simply. This assignment's worth 15% of the course. It's not too bad. You know, it's not a breeze. I wouldn't call it upsetting either. It's just, you know, you just got to go through the motion. So we have 3 tasks. We have the first task here, which is like, here's a snippet of a web page that's this size. Go and write some HTML and CSS to make a web page look exactly like this. We're a bit relaxed on the font style. You can use a different font. For task 2, it's like, here's another thing we want you to make a web page to look like. And then task 3 is another thing we want you to make a web page look like. And that's like 3 parts of the assignment. And the general gist is that the first question is meant to be really easy. So you're like, okay, this is very, very basic, very simple. The next one is meant to be very like, it's very much about getting a very rigid structure right, but there's not a lot of components on it at all. It's just playing with structures. And then the third one is kind of, to be honest, probably the more challenging part of the assignment. Task 3 is probably the hard part of assignment 1, which is trying to make you build a page that has a desktop and a mobile version that has a lot of little moving parts. Because the thing about web design, and this is why we do this in the assignment, you know, this is my profession, COMP6080, right? Some of you are like familiar with different courses that I look after, and it's like, this is my profession. And it's like, some people always say, they're like, oh, you know, I don't like this because it feels really weird to like just kind of look at an image and have to make a page like that. But it's like, honestly, a lot of the challenge of web development is being able to take something, to see something and be able to, like, how do I mangle code to make it look like this? You know, how do I try and understand the intricacies of styles and other things? So this one is also going to have a mobile version. So you have to make it look okay on a big screen and on a small screen as well. We can, I think there's lectures on all this stuff as well, so that's all quite covered. And then the 4th task is a little bit of like a taster of the weeks to come, in the sense that we ask you to do a little bit of JavaScript. So the point of task 4 is to make a dynamic form. So there's not a lot of CSS and styling for this activity, but there's a lot of, there's not a lot. There's just some JavaScript to make things like dynamic and change and stuff. Yeah, so that's the crux of assignment 1. You clone the repo. You got 4 folders to do the work in. That's really it. It's a very light introduction, particularly task 1, 2, and 3. When I say light, I don't mean like no work. I mean it's very like, you watch a few lectures and you're like, I understand everything I have to do here. Task 4 is slightly more involved. I think it involves some week 2 lectures. Scary, but you know, it's all good. In terms of some more detail about the assignment, some questions that students always ask are like, oh, how big is that thing? Or what color is that thing? So say you're building a web page like this one. What color is that green? How tall is this box? How wide is this button? There's lots of tools you can use for this. I use Photoshop locally, but that's a little bit of an overkill for what you might need. So essentially, we've got this tool called Photopea, which is it's essentially an online tool that lets you upload an image and poke around with it and analyze it. I've put some extra instructions here for you, and that's how you can analyze some of these images if you want to get some more detail about it. In terms of your assignments, pretty much we just recommend that you work on Google Chrome, but to be perfectly honest with you, most modern browsers are all extremely similar. They're all very good at being very similar. So you can use any browser you want, but do check it on Chrome near submission, because we have asked you to make sure it works. So you don't have to stress out about Chrome. If you don't have it, download it. I don't use it locally. I use Firefox, but Chrome's just kind of the standard. For assignment 1, we don't let you use any external libraries. So people have had questions. For people who know web development, there are libraries just like in programming. You know, when you first learn C, they're like, here's some C code. And then as you get better at it, they're like, we're going to include more things that do things for you, like string length. This first assignment is not including anything. It's just you and basic web technology. You aren't importing anything or including anything. It's just the page. The marking criteria for assignment 1 is relatively straightforward. Half your marks come from how it looks. Half your mark comes from the quality of code you write. So in the first lectures, we kind of talk about, like, you know, this is a good way to do things with CSS, and you know, we want your code to look clean and like right indented. In a lot of ways, this 50% is not looking for really smart things. It's basically saying, did you avoid bad things? And I know there's a handful of students here that might have done COMP6080, which is a course where there's a lot of strictness around the expectations on the approaches you have to code. And again, some people just have this assumption that because I teach different courses that everything's the same, but code quality is kind of like, it's not marked with extensive depth. It's like, you know, we've already given a list of things here. If you, for instance, have, this will make more sense after you watch the lectures, but for instance, if you have many very similar styles that could be inherited from each other or compounded, like composed together or anything like that, you might lose some marks, right? It's all really basic kind of stuff. Like most people who have an intuitive sense of what a good program design is, you'll be fine on that front. But yeah, half how it looks, half how your code is. That's the most we look at your code in the whole course, because it's very tiring to look at all your code. It's due on the Monday of week 4 at 10 p.m. The way things are submitted in this course, and I don't know, I don't think this might change in the next 24 hours, so keep an eye out for it. If it changes, I'll tell you on Friday. But in a lot of CSE courses, we use give to submit something. You go to the command line, you type give CS6080 and then something. We might do that. I just want to check some things first. But the way it's currently set up is very similar to other GitLab courses, which is that you basically, at submission time, we take a copy of your master branch as it is. So we basically take your master branch as what you submitted. So, and if you submit late, we just kind of take a copy of it hours later and stuff. So yeah, we take master. That's about it. Really quite simple. Late penalties, 2% per hour. That basically means you 2% off the max per hour. That means you basically have a 48-hour window roughly. So it's due on a Monday. You have till a Wednesday midnight, I guess, to finish it off. Again, there's a couple of more tweaks I want to make to this. So just to be clear, this will come out in a draft state tonight, and then tomorrow it'll be like, tomorrow night it'll be like, I'll remove the draft from it. And yeah, that's about it. You got 3 weeks to do it. Any kind of questions about that before we move on? Diamond says, how exact will buttons and sizes need to be? That's a good question. So you look at something like this and you think, how exact does this need to be? What we say to students all the time is that we don't expect it to be pixel perfect. It's very fine if it's off by a few pixels. It's very fine if the space between these letters is off by a pixel or two. Or, these things are a couple of pixels less. But we do expect things to look pretty similar because, like, you can literally use tools to see how big it is. It's just like when you use these tools, you typically will like click at the top of the box and drag down to the bottom. It will tell you how many pixels that is. And it's like, we don't expect you to get your mouse to be like exactly on the pixel at the top and exactly on the pixel at the bottom, right? So it's okay if it's a couple of pixels. Like we expect a margin of error with your ability to measure by a couple of pixels. And yes, the UNSW logo is included in the Git repo. Any kind of assets you need, we include. So that's all good. You don't need to worry about that. House says, so there's only one live lecture per week. This will be the only Monday lecture for a while. We'll probably do Wednesday lectures from now on. So Curtis has a good question. So we can't just eyeball it in assignments. You can eyeball it. That's totally fine. You don't have to measure stuff. You want to use Photopea. I don't know how to pronounce it. You will want to use that tool to get colors. Like, what kind of brown is this? I don't know. What kind of gray is this? I don't know. Use the tool to find out. In terms of sizing and spacing, you don't need to like measure it. You can eyeball it too, though. I'd eyeball it, but I feel confident about things. Some people might not. Like, I'd measure this one because it's easy and it's so repetitive. But like, a good example is these circles here. It's like, if these are like, there's like probably 3 pixels of space. I mean, maybe we can do that. Yeah, there's like probably 3 pixels of space here. And if it's 2 pixels or 4 pixels, we're not gonna care, you know. Particularly for something like this, where it's like, you've clearly demonstrated the skill. There are lots of eyedropper tools as well. I think there's one built into Chrome, for instance. We just gave you a website because everyone can access a website. It's not baked into any application. Peng says mobile version same as desktop version. This will all be in the spec. I've just shown you a draft of it. I still have to touch up a few things. I'm just showing you now because we're in the middle of a lecture. There'll be a little more info and stuff. Don't worry. All your questions will be answered. If they're not, you can always post on the forum. Okay, any last questions about assignment 1? Otherwise, we might do a really quick little, HTML-ish demo. Will the mobile version be marked on mobile? No. There's more info about that in the mobile lecture. I just want to reiterate to people again, it's like, the point of the first lecture is to give you a good sense of the landscape, right? There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of pre-recorded lectures to go and watch. So a lot of things become a lot more apparent as you go to watch those. So don't worry too much. Okay. Just quickly, I want to give you a sense of what like web development is like. Okay, so what I want to do is, on my own computer, right, I'm going to, just off screen here, I'm going to create a file called hello.html. Okay, this is just my text editor. I'm a dinosaur, I use Sublime Text. Now, the thing about web pages is that when you think about other languages like Python, C, and all this kind of stuff, you need a compiler to turn code into things that do things, stuff that does stuff, right? With a lot of web stuff, your browser is the compiler. Your browser does all this stuff for you, so you don't need to download anything. You've already downloaded it. I've got Microsoft Edge here. I use that for lecturing. I don't really use it. That's not bad, I have to say. And I've got this file here called hello.html. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open hello.html. Like literally here is my file. Let me just grab it. Oops. Literally, here's my file on my file system, hello.html. It's right here. It's just in the text editor. And I'm just going to grab it, and I'm just going to put it up here in a tab. Okay? And I'm just going to get these two side by side. And the thing is that a web browser is a compiler. So when I do things like, say, hello, and again, this is all in the HTML lecture, and I save this file, and I load this page, and I load this page, the page does something. It compiles that into something meaningful. I'm generalizing things a little bit here, but that's what a web browser is. It's a compiler for HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Think of it like that. Now, the introduction of JavaScript in week 2 and 3, HTML and CSS in weeks 1, 2, and 3, all that's covered for hours in the pre-recordings. Right now is not saying let's learn these things because they've already been made. Right now is saying let me just give you a very quick sense of the key little pieces of technologies that are used to build a web page and why they're important. So HTML is anything you see that kind of looks like this. You might see some bold text and some italic text like this. And then you might include a hyperlink. Again, this is not what this lecture is about. This is a full lecture on all this stuff. You include a hyperlink, and this is a piece of text that takes you to Google. So when I click on that link, I get taken to google.com. Great. I can also include an image. So let's say I include a UNSW image, and I'm going to go to, this will do. I'm going to copy the URL of that image and say that I would like to load an image from this URL here. And then when I go back to my page, there's that image. If I want to create new lines between these things, I can do that just by putting a horizontal rule, like a ruler line here, and now I have a line between those things. So this is what HTML is. It's building blocks of a web page. It looks like a 1993 website. Where we can take that further is by making things look pretty with CSS. So CSS is a way of adding what you call styles to HTML elements. And again, we go into a lot more depth about this in the other lectures. So for instance, if I want to create a element which we call a div, like this, which is just a block, and I say what's up here, it comes up down here. But if I want to use CSS to make it pretty, I can give that particular block some properties, right? And those properties are like, okay, say I want the background to be red. And now when I save that and refresh that, the background's red. So what CSS does is CSS does the coloring and the sizes and the layout and the positioning of your websites. HTML just gives you the fundamental building blocks. So there's an HTML lecture you can go and watch to start off the course. There's some CSS lectures that carry through right through the course. They're all great. Well, I mean, I hope they're all okay. Curtis has asked kindly that I do a marquee. There's another HTML tag called a can't spell marquee, which does some scrolling text. And this, oh, why does not, no, I can't, wait. Oh, I had it right. Wow, little brain. Yeah, this is a really random thing. You know. So, lots of fun stuff to do. That's like what we're doing in the course. We're making web pages, right? The next thing, which is kind of part of week 2 and stuff, and part of the 4th task in your assignment 1, is using JavaScript to make things happen. Okay? And I'll give you an example, a really simple example. Again, there's literally lectures on this stuff and we talk about it next week. I'm just giving you a taste of it without explaining much so that it looks familiar to you later and you can think of it piecing together. This is a static page right now. It just sits there and looks at you. We want a web page that interacts with you. So we can start writing some code that does stuff, some JavaScript. And when you write JavaScript on a page, it sits between some script tags. And I'm going to write a really little bit of JavaScript here. I want to do something that modifies this image. So I'm going to give this image up here an ID. Everything we modify needs, everything we work with in JavaScript tends to need an ID because JavaScript needs to know what anything is. Like, what's it called? And I'll call this one UNSW image, like this. Okay? And then what I'm going to do, and I'm just going to write a bit of JavaScript here. Again, this is way jumping ahead because we go through this in a lot more detail later. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to say in my code, think of this like Python, that I have my image, which is, this is stupid JavaScript syntax, which is the UNSW image on my page. And what I would like to do is I would like to say that when this image is clicked, I would like to call a function. And that function I will call grow image. And I will declare that function up here, or below. Function grow image like this. And what this function will do is it will literally say image.width equals image.width plus 10. And now when I load the page up, when I click on this image, you can hear my mouse, it increases its width by 10 every time. Okay, so I've done something dynamic with the page. I've interacted with it. And I just wanted to show you this small example because this touches on a few really fundamental things. It touches on some HTML, which are these blocky looking things. It touches on some CSS, which are properties you can give the HTML elements to make them look really nice or specific. And then we have some JavaScript down the bottom here that looks like hell, but it helps us actually modify the page. In this case, we say, this is the particular part of the page I want. I have a function that will, when it's run, increase its width by 10. And I'm saying that whenever someone clicks on my image, call that function. Again, it's very unfamiliar syntax. We go through it in a lot more detail later. But again, this gives you a sense of kind of the key components that you're working with when it comes to web. Someone says, is there documentation for each tag? Yeah, there's lots of tags. I mean, to be honest, you don't actually use that much HTML. Most of the things you're going to spend time Googling are going to be CSS. You're going to be Googling a lot of CSS. And there's tons of resources online. As Curtis says, MDN, W3 Schools is a popular one, though it's not very detailed and it's not the funnest one. But there's so much. Like, you know what it's like, some languages, you Google it and you just don't get a good answer, you know? Like you Google like Python string format time and you get the docs and then it doesn't make sense and it's all just confusing. But yeah, it's not so much. Web's pretty good. Web's pretty good in that regard. I honestly don't want to comment too much on the code tonight just because I feel weird explaining stuff that's kind of has a lot of background to do when we talk about it next week anyway. So please ask these questions next week and in future weeks. But for today, I just wanted to give a very crass, I don't know, sample of everything. Anywho, that kind of leads us to the end of today, which was about just giving you a sample of making web browsers do things. I'm here to answer any other questions, but something that we have at the end of every lecture too is if you have your phone with you, unless you're watching on your phone, in which case, aren't you a good Generation Z? You just take a quick, get the photo out, you know, just be like, yo, QR code, bam, that was my face. And then just like, take a photo of that. It takes you to a Google Doc, and the Google Doc literally just says what lecture you're watching and what do you think of it, and you just click OK. This would be great if you could do that because I collect all this data and I reflect on it and meditate on it and everything else. So thank you for taking the time to do that. I'll answer some last questions while we're here today because I do want to wrap up again a little early because we have there's a lot of lectures to watch this week and next week and it's the start of term. People have answered Max's question in the chat. Oh, that was actually kind of it. Are there any last questions before we wrap up? I can show you what, I wonder if I can show you what how does this work? This is what the camera's on. Does this work? Camera's sitting on top of my water bottle and then some brake fluid in front of my screen. That worked, right? It's kind of hard to see. Yeah, it's fine. I was just killing time. What are my thoughts on Squarespace? Kath says. Oh, that's a great question, Kath. So, Squarespace, Wix, these other sites have done an incredible job in making cheap, powerful websites that aren't too slow to account for what 90% of the internet's used for, which is just static information and a few very similar dynamic capabilities. Like, bookings, sales, image galleries, other things like that. I think it's great. People always say, is it going to replace your job? It's like, no, not at all. I mean, Squarespace has as much chance of, replacing web develop. Look, I mean, you wouldn't want to be a bad web developer. That's what I'll say. Like, I know some when I say bad web developers, like, I know people that were doing what I just showed you, really basic stuff, and that's as good as they got, and then they stopped learning, and that's all they did. They just built websites for people that paid them money, and then they ran out of work because Squarespace is cheap. People come to me all the time, right? And they're like, Hayden, can you build me a website for my mother? She's starting a business selling wool beanies. And I'm like, just go into Squarespace. Just go make it in Squarespace. What you're asking for is extremely common. So it's great, How useful would this course be for someone who has already done web dev in COMP6081? Useful? I don't know, 30% less useful maybe? Still relatively useful, I think. Is this sponsored content now? Yes, sponsored content. Thoughts on GitHub Copilot? I have not had the time to look into that, so I don't have any opinion on it at all. Cool. Okay. I'll give 30 seconds for last questions and we'll wrap up. I just got to put my foot down earlier and be like, that's the end of it. Oh, I got up early today. I'm tired. I hope everyone's well, by the way. I mean, we've got a third of the course here. I love teaching this course. So I'm really excited for the term, and I'm really excited for what you'll all get to do. Oh yeah, there's questions about, are we using functional components or class components? We're using functional components. That won't mean a lot to most people, but for those that do it, we're using functional components. Cool. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great night. And I'll see you all next Thursday. This will be our biggest break, but there's lots of lectures to watch. Make a start on assignment 1. You'll see me around the forum. I'll email you on Friday with a little bit of a summary of things. It'll be pretty short. It's a very simple, structured course. And yeah, have a great night. See you all soon.